Hello and welcome back to the She Gallery Show. Thank you so much for being with us. Thank you so much for being with us, Audrey.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, and thank you for being with us. Today is January 13th. It is Monday. This is Season 7 of the She Gallery Show. This is Segment 2 of Season 7 of the She Gallery Show here with Can TV, and you are live with us. That means that you can join us throughout this entire segment by calling in at the phone number found at the bottom of your screen, which is 312-738-1060. That phone number, again, is just on the bottom of the screen right over there. And we'll be there throughout the segment, so you are more than welcome to call us, join in the conversation. Feel free to ask us questions, comments, whatever it may be. We have a great segment here today. We are here with fine artist Audry Cramlit, and she is a visual artist, a fine artist who came here all the way from Colorado, all the way.
1,000 miles.
She is a painter, sculptor, and an instructor. And we are very honored to have her here with us. Audrey and I had the chance to meet at the Hyde Park Art Center while she was temping as a sculpting instructor while we were there. And when I talked to Audrey here today, I said, Audrey, is there a quote that means something to you? You'll notice I'm wearing a t-shirt that says, art is not an end but a beginning. And this is a quote by
Ai Weiwei.
I have a hard time pronouncing that. And you know, quotes carry a lot of significance, whether you're an artist or not. And Audrey, you want to share with us your quotes?
Well, I had two, right? The first one was, simplicity is difficult. And I learned that in Italy at a stone carving compound. It was above one of the machines, and when I started stone carving, which I don't do often, I realized how difficult that is. Smooth, even anything takes a tremendous amount of time, whereas texture and juicy, interesting, that's much funner and much less tedious. It's less difficult ultimately, especially if you're going to cast something in bronze and go all the way. That, all that smooth detail and its simplicity is difficult for everyone.
And we hear that a lot. Less is more.
Yeah.
You hear that a lot in art school. I remember when we were taking our curating classes for the Business for Arts classes, and I remember we were learning of the show from the 70s in New York that people were lining up to get into, and it was the white show, and there was nothing in the gallery. It was white.
Yeah.
It was the beauty of the absence of. And it is the simplicity that is difficult, and it's simple, but yet it's
difficult.
Challenging.
It's challenging.
Yes.
It's hard to restrain.
And what is the second quote that you shared with us?
The second one I hammer into my class all the time, which is, to describe is to destroy, and to suggest is to create. And that was originally by Robert Dawsonau. I think he's a photographer, actually. And that is something that I really try to push into people, because when you start describing something, you're kind of beating your viewer over the head in a way when you're hyper realistic. You're giving all that information, whereas if you're suggesting something, then the viewer can become engaged and create their own story behind it, or pull up their own memories from it if it's not just verbatim, and that is a style. It's a very valid style, and there's a very few amount of artists that can actually pull that off, so and they've probably been working since they were this big. So I try, because I have older students, a lot of times I have retired people, and they don't have, I tell them, you're not going to live long enough to get that good. So let's take some shortcuts and do some fun work.
And keeping it real. So Audrey, you've been an instructor now for some time, but let's go back to the beginning. You were born in Colorado. right? And you've always been into art. You want to talk to us a little bit about your love for art and how you made it to Chicago and how you got into sculpting in the first place?
Well, I was actually born in Plainfield, Illinois, but we moved to Chicago when I was 2. So I don't remember Plainfield. I mean, to Colorado. So I don't remember Plainfield too much. But yeah, I always would draw in color, and then I won a grocery store coloring contest when I was 5, and it was all over after that. I got a Fuzzy Pumper barber shop, and that was it. And I broke my arm that year too. I broke my left arm, and I'm a lefty.
Oh, wow.
And so I just went right to my right arm, and when the cast came off, I went back, and I swear that has helped me with sculpture because I'm ambidextrous now. I'll work with both. It's so much easier to work with both hands. So I tend to work with both hands, and
that's amazing.
The old arm break worked out for me.
So you came to Chicago in '93, but before you came to Chicago, you finished school in Colorado. You went to school for advertising and design?
Yes, I went to school at Colorado Institute of Art for advertising design, and I graduated in '87, right when the first Mac came out. And so all the old school things that I learned just completely became obsolete.
Wow.
And I was burned out by that time anyway, so I went right up to Breckenridge, and then I spent the next 7 years in Breckenridge snowboarding. It was the first year they started allowing snowboarding, so I became a snowboarder. I gave up my skis, and then about 7 years in, I was like, dude, I can't complete a sentence without the word dude. I gotta get out of here. And so I moved to Chicago. My grandma lived down in Joliet, and so it was a nice way to be able to get to know my grandma. I didn't get that growing up because my parents moved us out away from the family, which was devastating for her. So I got some quality time in with my grandma.
That's awesome. So you went through all of this schooling only to find out you couldn't really use it.
I did at my last year in Breckenridge. I did get a job at a print shop, and I was doing typesetting, and it just wasn't for me. I was not a team player. You have to be able to work with people as a commercial artist, and it's kind of a solitary thing for me. I didn't need anyone's opinion. I would design a business card, and they'd be like, well, we like this, but can you change that? And I was like, no, I'm over that. I'm ready for the next thing. What do you got next? So it was not for me.
And this is when Audrey decided or realized, really, that you said, I am a fine artist. This is who I am. And we had a conversation earlier on, like, what separates a fine artist from
a commercial artist.
From a commercial artist. And you're explaining how you went to school for advertising and design and how all this plays into that role. And to be a commercial artist, you are serving somebody else. You are a client. You are or you're serving a client. Versus being a fine artist. And you have dedicated yourself to your passions. But before we move more into your growth as a fine artist, let's go back a little bit. After your experience becoming a ski bum, very liberating, you said, you know what, this is obsolete, and instead of like, oh, I'm going to go back to school and figure out what else I could do, you went and you found some freedom, and you had some fun. And then you got to reconnect with your roots, spend time with your grandmother while you were working at this print job design, and found that you were a fine artist. So in all of these are learning experiences. You're reflecting, you're figuring yourself out, and you come to Chicago and you end up going to the Art Institute and you study here. What was that experience like for you coming to study in Chicago versus studying in Colorado?
Well, I didn't do a lot I didn't attend the Art Institute. I did a class there.
One class.
But that was
like that was all I could afford.
That was all I could afford. Literally, that was it. And it was. I loved it. It was great. It's a great school. But I do kind of further my education with, finding classes and things that I'm interested in. So I'll go to take classes in Italy, or I've taken classes in France. I just recently, in 2018, went to Cambodia to see Angkor Wat with one of my instructors.
That's where this is from.
Stop!
Yes.
Love
yes,
it.
This is from one of our attorney friends who got me this scarf from Cambodia many years ago. Mr. Pajan, yes.
Cool. That's, yeah. Cambodia was stunning. I mean, we saw probably 40 different temples and sites, and it's just awe-striking. It's inspiring. You kind of...
How did you get out of this box? Usually people say, oh, I'm going to go to this school. I'm going to go over there. You said, no, I'm going to find my schools throughout the world. How did you, what led you to these places?
The internet.
The internet. So last week we spoke with Micaela Flor and Ms. B, and we had a segment about intuition and the evolution of human development. And something that many humans do, but especially artists, I think, is follow your intuition. And I think that works both allowing your next process, right? Your next step in your art. What am I going to do next? And also within the work itself. The quote that you mentioned earlier, to describe is to destroy, to suggest is to create. She says, to give a suggestion, to give it a movement, a peekaboo, some imagination. And that's only that you can really find through intuition while you're working a piece. So, I mean, that's the way that I interpret that, right?
Okay.
And you did this throughout the entire world. And you're continuing to do this. I had a conversation with Audrey. She says, I just came back from Mexico. I want to go back to Mexico. I want to learn Spanish. And I'm pretty sure your work will continue to evolve. I visited Audrey's studio. She has a tremendous, numerous amount of work that we'll get to take a look at in a second, and you could see her evolution. Here we have some newer pieces that she has that she'll talk to us a little bit more about. And while you were here, you came to Chicago. You stepped away from working with the arts for a little bit, right? And you got a job with the trading floor.
Yep, I moved here by the skin of my teeth with any money I had in my pocket, and the trading floor was the first place I got hired. And that was a great experience, not only to learn about how the world economy works, which I had no idea. I went to art school, but I also met my husband, who now we've been married 25 years.
Yay,
and so that was a great experience, but there was only so much I could do down there. It was not my passion. And so I enjoyed it, and then when I kind of hit the ceiling of what I could do, which was phone clerk, I was like, now what can I do? And then I went to work over at Scenic View on 18th, and worked doing set design and painting and
Six Flags, all that good stuff.
All that good stuff.
So we're talking about paint jobs, trade shows, big jobs. And again, you said, you know what? I'm not a commercial artist. And this is when Audrey started to get a little crafty, and she started working more with textile. And that's when you really gained your urge to sculpt, is that right?
Yeah, I found I was doing I was finding frames at thrift stores and collaging, and my hands kept doing this, and I was like, I think I need to sculpt. And so I got some clay and got a book, and it was awesome. And then I needed more instruction. I sculpted an écorché which is starting with the skeleton and then building the muscles on that. And
wow.
That was the first thing I ever did. And then I thought, I need instruction.
First piece?
Yeah. And that was...
Wow. My first piece was one hand.
That's also a good one.
Not an entire body. Starting with the bones and working out with the muscles. That is a challenge.
It is a challenge, and it's a good exercise.
Great.
And I loved it. I really enjoyed it. But then I needed more information, and that was 99. There was no internet, or I didn't have a computer at that point, so I found Palette and Chisel, which is a non-for-profit school in the Yellow Pages. Some of you older folks might remember the Yellow Pages.
And for those of you who don't know, it is a yellow book. And you do searches on there, just like you would for the internet, but more so like library style.
It's a nice big fat phone book.
And this is when you decided to take some sculpting classes.
Yeah, and I found Palette and started, and I just adored my teacher. She was also a Pilsen gal, and when she moved, about 6 years later, she moved to Connecticut and volunteered me for her job, and so I 6 years in, I started teaching, and I'm still there. That was 12 years ago, 13 years ago now.
And Audrey is still at the Palette and Chisel.
I'm still there.
She's still an instructor. She's still learning from her students. She says that out of all of these years, she's learned more from her students than anybody else. And I think that speaks volumes for what the art community can do. When you are making work on your own, you have that time where it's you and it's this magical intuition, this time where you're thinking and you're working and you're creating. And when you're doing this together as a community, the process is different.
It is.
The result is different.
Definitely. It's nice to have a community to work with, to bounce things off of, to bounce things off of. I think the work is always going to be stronger in a group where you can get somebody that is like, yeah, that's right, but this is a little off, whether you do what they say or not, it gives you another viewpoint, and the more viewpoints is very helpful. Despite the fact I couldn't work commercially with other people, it is good to be open to other people's impressions when the work is still in process.
That is beautiful. And something that we were just talking about earlier, that I was just telling Audrey, I'm like, I really left being an artist to do all this production. I'm like, talking with her, I was really inspired to get back into sculpting. Not just because she was such an amazing instructor, even though she was only a temp at the Hyde Park Art Center, and I cannot afford the Palette and Chisel yet. But when she would teach at the Hyde Park Art Center, it was a completely different environment, a completely different inspiration. Because you can have somebody that can teach you how to do something, but then there's somebody that looks outside and makes you look at something different, like the suggestion that you made. And I learned more while she was tempting than in the rest of the years that I took their sculpting. So thank you so much for that. These little tiny tips that you may not realize that people really, really take with them. So I said, I really want to get back into sculpting because I was so inspired, and I think that when an artist can do that, then you're really, really making a difference, not just for yourself as an artist, but for those around you, and I'm sure your students. So one of the things that I was mostly fascinated by when I first visited Audrey's studio here, we're going to share this photo, is some of these photos from when you were a child, because the horse has been grand in your practice, right? Do you want to talk to us a little bit about your background with horses and your sculpting with horses?
Well, when we moved to Colorado when I was 2, my folks bought stables, and so we had a barn and 6 acres, and there was always kids coming and boarding their horses at our stables, and my mom was a professional rodeoer, and so I just grew up literally on a horse. Before I would think I was 4. That's why they used to call me the peanut on the elephant. And so it's just an intrinsic part of me. So as much as I love sculpting the figure, I worked very hard to learn how to sculpt the figure, and I'm still learning. Same with the horse, but the horse came very naturally and organically to me to be able to sculpt that horse or any horse. It flows. And you see, they're not described, but they're horses, but there's no legs on them, in part because you can't really do that very well with clay. The ones on the right are bronze, and it just gives the personality of them without describing too much.
Mm-hmm. And in her studio, I did see a very detailed image that she had done of a horse with a child and an apple looking up at the stars, and that was from your childhood.
It was from that picture.
It was amazing, and all of your work is so amazing. Let's take a look at some of your newer work here. Do you want to talk to us about some of these pieces?
Sure. I find that sculpture's a little bit hard to move. People are always like, oh, I really like that, but I don't have any place to put it. So I started working with some wall pieces, so incorporating the texture into the work that you could hang on the wall.
Wow.
So that's kind of, I think that one's after the ball. Those two on the right, those are little jars that I had made up. You can either, we've been putting lip gloss in them, so they're either lip gloss jars. They're based on old coins, old Greek coins. That one, oh gosh, that was called Thin Line originally. It's kind of about a balancing act.
Ah, these are gorgeous. Which one is that?
The one on the right.
This one?
Yep.
Okay.
Kind of. That one was just at SOFA. I got to go and participate in SOFA, which is, of course, thank you. Every sculptor's dream in Chicago to be in SOFA.
And so earlier we were talking about, being a commercial artist and then drawing this line to becoming a fine artist. One of the benefits that you have as becoming a fine artist, being a fine artist, is that you also have gallery representation, which you carry, and that's not something easy to gain, and that's where you're at, so congratulations.
Thank you.
Why don't you talk to us a little bit about these other pieces here? What material are these made out of?
Those are clay. They're bisque-fired clay, and
it's like an entire story.
Yeah, and it kind of just came out, and I don't necessarily tell the story. I let the viewer interpret the story how they want to.
And earlier we were going to touch back to the intuition. So many artists, and like yourself, like myself, sometimes we use a study, such as this, right? Mm-hmm. Here we have a study where we're working with a human or a horse or some kind of a study. But then you have work like this, where you're really just relying on your intuition and your imagination.
Yeah.
You want to talk to us about the difference of creating these works when you're working with A, a model, and B, directly from your imagination?
The work from the imagination is always more creative. Always. A lot of times it might start with a model, like the hanging horse guy, that started with a model, and of course there wasn't a horse in there, I put that on there. The holy one, I started drilling holes in my work because I was very frustrated that I was describing too much.
Wow.
And so I started drilling holes, A, to see how well it would hold together, and then, as strangely enough, the first one I drilled out of frustration because I was mad at how described the model was. It wasn't that piece, it was a different piece. And the palette and chisel put it on their cover of the catalog. So the first time they had a sculptor on the cover of the catalog forever, and I was like, that's the piece you chose?
The best of the accidents.
Yeah.
Wow, look at all this movement. You want to talk to us about how you create these movements? How big are these pieces?
The thin line on the left there, it's about this tall on a stainless steel coil, and it's welded onto a. Yeah, she's about this tall, and then the coil, so it stands about this high, and that was the version that was at SOFA. So when you push it, it moves, which is very fun to watch people freak out because they're like, oh, it's gonna fall over.
It's like it's not often that you get to wiggle a sculpture.
Right. It's not.
Touch it, play with it, let it bounce around.
That is exactly what the goal was. It's like sculpture is often so static. How can I create movement with sculpture? And that was pretty literal, but
here we see movement, but this is movement within a dress. Now where you're actually bouncing the sculpture. This is gorgeous.
Thank you. I did that from, first I had a tiny little piece of tin foil and I made this little dress, and then I made it larger out of wax using that little piece of tin foil that I shaped. That is Paris.
This one here?
Mm-hmm. I think that the position is very peaceful, and people seem to really relate to it a lot.
And this goes back again. Here we go, and I'm just going to keep referencing back to this quote. To describe is to destroy, and to suggest is to create. This is a perfect example of what this is. So what Audrey is saying is that, no, she doesn't have arms. No, they're not perfect. But it falls into your imagination.
Yeah.
And you cannot replicate that.
Right?
You cannot, you don't have a model to study that part of your imagination from.
I have a mentor. He's Russian, and in the back of my head, always hear him go, "Why does she need arms? What does she need a head for?" He'll come along and rip off the head. What does she need a head for? Okay.
And you know, a lot of times when we see these sculptures or these images that sometimes don't have a face, many times the artist, and this might not be your case, but many times the artist does it because it's, well, like you said earlier, actually, you did. It's up to the viewer. So if you see a sculpture or something faceless, that could be me. That could be you.
Right.
That could be my mom. That could be, you know, that could be anybody. Now suddenly this represents absolutely everybody or anybody that you wanted to. And they carry these characters. You know, they carry a character, they carry a personality. Your pieces do.
Hopefully, thank you. Yes, that is always the goal, is to, if I'm working from a model, try to capture that model a little bit.
Now, are most of these that you start here, are these pieces that you start off with a live model and then you take it off with your imagination? For the most part, yes?
A lot of times, yes. I will take it off of a pose that, you know, intrigued me particularly. And then I'll make another one, and then another one, and then another one. And so it diverges from the original, but it was still struck like this set is called Memento Mori, because the model that I worked from for this, we were in Italy, and she had Memento Mori tattooed across her whole chest, like from here to there.
What
and
does
it was
that mean?
beautiful. It means remember death.
Memento Mori. Oh, I don't think they could see it from right here. Well, you could see the top, which is very helpful. Can we
You wanna
carry it this way? Put it just so they could see the maybe
on the side, and then
scoot it a little bit more that way.
Okay.
I want to see her face. Yeah.
There's the face, and then she's hollow in the back. Those are kind of all the things that make us work.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Why don't we take a look at these pieces here? Are these sculpted as well?
These are sculpted in wax originally. Can you see that?
Yes.
That helps.
So yes, why don't you talk to us about this process?
The process, the wax is a nice precursor to bronze. Anything that you see cast in bronze was wax first.
Okay.
So
You could lift this one up a little bit,
this
maybe. Is it a little bit too heavy? If it's too heavy, don't worry about it.
So here's the back of Moray.
So this is casted first in...
I sculpted it in wax, and you know, whatever medium you're working in, whether it's wax or clay, it really does affect the outcome. They each have their own personalities, you know, wax or clay, and so it changes up my work a little bit. I could never do this in clay. It's like a sheet of wax that I molded and then added different designs and patterns. I was loving the machinery and the mechanics of things, and it started out in the head quite a lot, so it represented the workings of the brain. And
That's
then,
very thoughtful.
you know, but yeah, this is Memento, Remember, and Death, Memento Mori.
Gorgeous, gorgeous.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being with us, Audrey. We are wrapping up. Thank you so much for being with us as well. Is there any words of advice that you want to share with the audience before we go? For sculptors, artists?
It is never too late to learn how to do art. Anything that you're passionate about, you can learn how to do. Go find somebody to teach you. They want to teach you. They can help you.
And you can find schools anywhere in the world. Thank you so much, Audrey.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll see you next week.